First time I've ever preached that people have had to sign a consent form. Well, thank you for taking time tonight to help Kirby and Carmen work on their research. I'm glad to be part of this. I've been asked to talk to you for just a few moments about service. There's a well-known, well-told story of Jesus serving his disciples found in John 13, from which you'll learn 3 important lessons about how Jesus served. You've heard this story before. It takes place at a crucial moment in John's story of Jesus. John 13 is the story of Jesus washing his disciples' feet. John tells it like this. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that he had wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you." Now, as I said earlier, there are 3 important lessons you learn about the way Jesus serves. First, Jesus served despite his schedule. John introduced the story this way. Now, before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Now, John uses the phrase, his hour, several times in the book of John. In John 2, Jesus and his mother attend a wedding feast, and they run out of drinks. When Mary mentioned it to Jesus, Jesus responded by telling her, "Woman, my hour is not yet come." In John 7, the temple officials wanted to arrest Jesus, but again, John says his hour had not yet come. And again, in John chapter 8, Jesus was speaking rather boldly in the treasury of the temple when some of the people wanted to arrest him. But again, John tells you his hour had not yet come. Up until this moment in the Gospel of John, his hour had not yet come. But then you open to chapter 13, and John says, knowing his hour had come. The phrase is clearly a reference to Jesus' death, and as you continue reading John's story, you notice that his hour, his time to die and be glorified, were very close. John 13 through 17 consists of one long conversation in one setting. As Jesus eats with his disciples, he talks to them and then he prays with them. In just a few short hours from John 13, John tells how Jesus is arrested, crucified, and buried. But even though Jesus has all this on his plate, he still washed his disciples' feet. The second message you find in John 13 is that Jesus served despite his status. John says in chapter 13 and verse 3, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, and that he had come from God and was going to God. John spends a lot of time telling you who Jesus is. In John 1:1, John says he was in the beginning with God, and in fact, he was God. John fills his gospel with all of those I am statements of Jesus. I am the vine, I am the door, I am the shepherd, the bread of life, the way, the truth, and the life. It's also in John that Jesus constantly reminds his disciples and those around him that he was sent by God as the Son of God to do God's work. Clearly, no one is more credentialed than Jesus. And yet, knowing who he was and where he was from, Jesus stood up, wrapped himself in a towel, and washed the disciples' feet. The third lesson you find in chapter 13 of John is that Jesus serves regardless of the response. It's clear from the text that all 12 disciples are there at the meal, even Judas. Later in the chapter, John tells you the story of Jesus giving a piece of bread to Judas. In chapter 13 and verse 2, John says, the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. And verse 11 says Jesus knew who was going to betray him. Yet the very next verse says, when Jesus had finished washing their feet. That means he washed the feet of Peter, who would deny him in the courtyard. He washed the feet of the other disciples who will run at his arrest. And he washed the feet of Judas, who leaves the table to betray him for 30 pieces of silver. Have you ever noticed how often you and I are called to serve? Every day you and I are surrounded with opportunities and invitations. Every day we're invited to serve someone, somewhere, in some way. And every day we offer excuses as to why we can't serve. Not me, not now, and not them. By telling us and showing us that Jesus served, John is showing what it means for us to serve like Jesus. And as he finished washing his disciples' feet, Jesus himself said, "Now that I, your teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet." So what lessons do we learn? Well, first, we learn that serving Jesus means we serve despite our busy schedules. It would be understandable if Jesus said, "I'm too busy to wash your feet right now. I have other important things to do." But he didn't. You know what it's like to be busy. You're college students. Sometimes you wonder how you'll fit everything into one day. There's the school stuff, homework, tests, papers, random extra credit for listening to some guy give a sermon. And then you have your social life, dating, social service clubs. And in the middle of all that, you hear calls to serve. There's the Lighthouse Ministry, Wishing Well, Outreach, reading to school kids. It's easy to just say, "I'm too busy to serve." But not Jesus. John says he served knowing his hour had come. Second thing you learn by watching Jesus in his is that we serve regardless of our status. This seems to be Peter's objection, and I think it would be mine as well. Washing the feet of anyone was the job of a hired servant. If there wasn't a hired servant, let Matthew do it. He's a tax collector. Let Peter, James, or John do it. They're fishermen. And they're used to the stench, by the way. Lest anyone forget, Jesus is neither of those. Could you blame Jesus if he said someone else needs to do this? I'm too important to wash their feet. It's easy to fall into that trap of thinking, I'm too important, too educated, too accomplished to be doing something like that. Someone needs to pick up trash, and we respond, I'm not the janitor. People are needed downtown to work in a soup line, and we think, I'm from a middle-class family. Let someone else do it. This was Peter's objection. Washing feet was not the job of Jesus. And yet, the text tells us that he, knowing he had come from God and was going back to God, washed his disciples' feet. The third thing you learn when you read John 13 is that serving like Jesus means we serve despite the response. Could you blame Jesus if he stood up and said, I know what you're going to do, and I'm not going to wash your feet? Yet even knowing how his disciples would react, Jesus washed their feet. Would you serve someone you knew was about to turn their back on you, desert you, and betray you? Does your service depend on their response? You see, serving like Jesus means we serve those who refuse to return service. We should serve those who might even take advantage of us. We should even serve those who might try to hurt us. Every day, you and I are surrounded with opportunities and invitations to serve. Every day, you're invited to serve someone, somewhere, in some way. And every day, we offer excuses as why we can't serve. Not me, not now, and not them. And then there's Jesus in the shadow of his own cross, with a full knowledge that he is the Son of God, and with a full understanding of who it is he serves, wrapped in a towel, down on his knees, washing their feet. If we want to serve like Jesus, we'll do the same thing.